This is, once again, Jeff and Aviv in conversation at the frontiers of emergence. How about that as a way to begin today, Jeff?
I love it. And I love that the title has now emerged. Seems everything must emerge if it's going to be at the frontiers of emergence.
Where would you like us to go today?
Well, I'm aware that you have been in a deep experience, a collective experience with perhaps 200 or more people the last few days, that today is indeed a recovery day for you, and yet you've very graciously made yourself available to share about the experience and to offer some insights while they are completely fresh. And I understand, moreover, that this is in fact the first conversation you've had about the last few days. So thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this, and I imagine a lot of people will appreciate your perspectives, and particularly given how absolutely on the leading edge it is.
Well, thank you. The kindness and the generosity is yours. And we do have, I believe, a shared appreciation that coming out of an intense experience, when you are somewhat beginning the contraction from the accentuated potency, multi-dimensional nature of an experience, when you are in the contraction phase, actually what you codify and what you etch in your memory is important. It's part of the technology we ought to be using when we go up our bar and come down. And I've appreciated tremendously that we have had this practice now for the last few months, that you and I meet on Monday morning. I'm still in recovery, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to be reflective and to see what would the in-the-moment distillation of the experience bring forward. And it serves as a technology. I was talking this weekend about the perception shutdown syndrome. And in the context of that, I first explained the mechanics of a perception shutdown. I didn't know I was going to go there, but there you go, we're going live. So I explained the nature of the perception shutdown syndrome. And if it is of interest, I can say something about it. And then I framed a sevenfold strategy, just a beginning set of strategies, how to either escape or release or not be so impacted by the perception shutdown syndrome. So how about I first give the medicine, then I explain the problem. The reason I connected to it now is because one of the steps was create for yourself, when you're still in the presence of the experience that brought up in you profound insight, realization, perception, profound sentiment, a sense of significance. Etch in your memory some of the significance and the intention that it produces in you, and do so by creating, therefore, what I call mental and psychospiritual rujums. Rujum, what is a rujum? I think it's an Arabic word. When you walk in the desert, as I have often walked in the deserts in the Holy Land in Israel, especially the Sinai desert, even though some will claim that's not part of the Holy Land. I leave that for the biblical scholars. That's where we claim Moses traveled with the Israelites for 40 years. Sometime when you go there and I climbed there, presumably the mountain, that the different ways to describe, but there is one mountain on his name, which is not the biblical mountain where he supposedly have gone up to carve the Ten Commandments or receive the transmission of the Ten Commandments from the intelligence and the angelic presence that guided him to offer a code of conduct to liberate in this case, the Israelites, but to really bring to humanity a certain transitional operating system to enable a collective of people to move from being less barbaric and more released into the sapient potential of their nature, which is one way to think about the Ten Commandments. And so when you walk, when you hike in the desert, when you come to plateaus, the Bedouins who mark the trail, what they do, and they are not just the only people to do so. You walk in different places around the world and you see the trail marks by putting few stones on top of the other. So you know where the trail goes next, especially when you come to a place and you may come to a point in the trail where it turns, but there is a path that goes forward and you're not sure where to go next, and you need to find the rujum, the 2 or 3 or 4 stones on top of the other. The metaphor was, we have the capacity when we travel up and down in our own formation and in our own map of meaning and the etchings that we create inside the topography of meaning that we have, we can put rujums along the journey such that if we get lost, we can mentally travel back. So I mean that mentally and psychospiritually. You and I can now talk for half an hour about how we do that, but I'm just mentioning that you do some of the prayer and meditation technologies that we use. They can develop such markers that you can travel to, and they can be purely mental. They can involve also a movement of sort or a particular sacred dance practice or anything else that will bring a kinetic reference that will connect the unconscious and the conscious with certain intentions. So I say that because we're dialoguing on the contraction day when I'm in also a recovery process, when all of the 3 days are still floating in my space, and I find even in what is appearing now the tremendous value to the ecology that you are able to provide with your in-depth interest and curiosity and the conductive space that you create in our dialogue that enables both of us and enables me to access some of it and to thereby also etch it in my memory once more, and also have a recorded version of that so we can trace it if we need to. So that's a just recognizing the gift of the moment.
Thank you. I love the inner rujums and appreciate the inner trails that we are trailblazing when we are on the frontiers of emergence, as you have been this last weekend.
Yeah, where the core premise is that, so where will it be useful to start? Shall I try to offer just a high overview, not so much of the content, but the process nature of what is converging in a moment, and what I therefore I'm anticipating is appearing and arising with different communities all around the world at this time, each in a slightly different way, perhaps with different frameworks and maps of meaning, but perhaps more alike than not, more in parallel than not, if and when we are prepared to step back and see parallel endeavors from the 20K or the 30K point of view. There is tremendous importance in actually building distinctions and not homogenizing, if there is such a word. If not, I just made it up. And seeing the distinctions of the unique contributions that any line and any body of work and any endeavor brings, and at the same time there is value in looking to decipher the open source elements that can be harvested in different endeavors. And I find that that's one of the unique contributions that you are able to bring to dialogue here, in that you are helping me, helping both of us, look to discern and decode what of, say, what I'm going through can be sourced, can be offered into the open source of all developmental, evolutionary inclined community endeavors anywhere. And it's when we bring that sentiment and that orientation, mental and process alignment, in a way we offer it as a service, as a gift, as a something we proffer for others, which is part of the idea of portals of perception.
Yes. Yes, I love that you bring us into a deep and specific inquiry, and I want to say rigorous. So there is great clarity as well. And when we have one specific example where we've gone deep, and then we look at the parallel developments that are co-arising, we can appreciate the commonality and the distinctions much more vividly than if we stayed at the more surface level of the whole panoply of co-arising projects. So I'm getting so much by going deep with you. And then when I go into other aspects of my work, it's empowering to have these points, these common points of clarity and rujums, as it were.
Yes. So there is value and importance and significance in both moves, the going deep. Sometimes we will call it going vertical. Sometimes we will call it going laser, like forensic, to appreciate the anatomy and the inner workings of a certain discipline or a certain practice or a certain map of meaning. And then there is value in soaring high, to be all-encompassing, to see whatever it is you're engaged in inside an even broader, inclusive picture. And there is always a bigger picture we can soar to. And once we soared into a very big picture, we think that is the meta picture. Guess what? There is another greater picture to contain that too. So, shall I try and frame 5 natures that I detected and observed in this process?
Yes, let's go with that. That intuitively resonates for me.
Nature 1 is recognizing that we are all participants in a rolling event, a rolling planetary event. In many ways, the last 4 years, the last 12 years, the last 20 years, the last 40 years, the last 60 years are culminating now in a rolling event. This event, as you have observed yourself in your writings about the different waves of change, it seems to have a geopolitical dimension, an economic dimension, certainly the dimension of the pandemic and the behavioral change that it brought to all of our lives. We are also interested to very much recognize that it has a metaphysical, psychoenergetic dimension. We see it in how nature came back, because we were not there to hustle nature so much, because we were staying locked at home. But we also mean that in the sense of the deepest, most profound changes that are occurring with people that are inquiring to the significance of this time beyond the level of the pandemic and the economic and the geopolitical. So there is a registration that this decade or multi-decade process that we have entered, call it phase shift, call it the cataclysmic transformation age, whatever way you will choose to name it, there is a recognition that we are in a rolling event. And therefore, why it becomes critical when we come together as communities, it says that learning becomes, we learn so much when we are together, but the learning is almost a secondary nature, a secondary principle. The first principle is actually to be inside the nature of the event as it unfolds, because there is an emergent property that is much more interior as in the individual sense, and interior in the communal gathering sense. And so we learn a lot when we come together, but this is not, quote unquote, a learning gathering. It's a gathering to be at the cutting edge of what is emerging with us at the moment, and allow and accept and embrace the learning that it offers us. So there is a reversal, whereas I would often be with groups and gatherings and communities, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could say these were more learning inclined gatherings. We are now in the unfolding of discovery in which learning is a byproduct rather than the premise or the focus of the gathering. And the second nature, what enables that critically, is that even though there are many very different people that come together, there are some shared sentiments, deep and profound shared sentiments that allow us to come together to be in a shared inquiry, mutual respect, reverence to the phenomenon of life and the diversity of life on this beautiful sacred planet we call Earth, and the care for the continuance of all life, the generosity and the kindness of spirit, the recognition that there is something profound and high in potential with every human being, and that therefore continually we're invited to practice that call to attention. Beware of the person you dismiss, because the person you dismiss is part of you. And the person you dismiss, if you recognize that we are climbing up a mountain in metaphoric terms or in real terms, every person may be the helper you need the next minute, because you never know when you're going to suffer altitude sickness. So the richness of sentiments, that even if we have people that disagree on many different political point of views and other elements in terms of their map of meanings, not everybody needs to agree with everything, not at all, but the sense that when communities and people gather together to inquire deeply, part of the operating system that enables that is an interesting ambidextrous, and I started making up a new word, multidextrous, because I recognized we were not just integrating two opposites, we were integrating multi-perspectives in one. But particularly this idea of being irreverent in the courage of your inquiry, while you're able to at the same time hold dear with a sense of preciousness and reverence the fact that human beings can be together in a shared inquiry. That's significance. So second nature, first nature rolling event, second nature that sense of shared sentiments that we can together discover when we embark on a shared inquiry. And as a result of it, third nature is that there is always the prospect of becoming a collective agency, where the inquiry and the wisdom and intelligence we're seeking will reveal its multifaceted nature through different voices. And one person will offer the theological insight that arose with them, and another will offer the phenomenology of that experience, and a third person will offer the melodic, and a fourth person will offer the poetry, and a fifth person will draw this into a picture. And the recognition that we are forever needing now media much more diversified and rich than what any one person may be able to codify in language. And that we therefore need to surround ourselves with different talents and skills and capabilities, and that we are forever in search for the ways, the means, the protocols, the behavioral sciences that will offer inclusion and will allow us to still be dialectic inside the inclusion. So it's not that everything that everybody offers, immediately you have to say yes to it. There is a refinement and an inquiry and a search and a gentle resistance that can be offered as well. So actually building safety and ease with a collective to do so is by itself an extraordinary endeavor. It can only begin when we recognize that we have passed the point of a solo, largely of a solo luminary. What we need, even if you have a leader of a process, in this case I'm leading the process, and I may be offering a framework, and I'm possibly am sherpaing the process, because we are gathering with others, there is first of all so much more that I can get to, because the container holds more that allows me and everybody else to access. And then there are insights and revelations. We can call those revelations when somebody skate, as you and I speak of it, to the edge of what they know, and they're able to codify in language something. It's a revelation for them and may become a revelatory input to the process as a whole. The fourth nature is the nature of activation. There are people who have been in various development circles and endeavors maybe for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And the recognition that all that you seeded in your life and on your journey, sometimes through pain, through hardship, through dedication, because of this nature of a rolling event, it's being activated. Capacities that were latent are being activated. Perceptions that were latent are being activated. Understandings that we have had intellectually or mentally are being activated to become fully embodied realizations. Perceptions and appreciations that were upheld in a narrow range, in one octave of yourself, are released to the 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 octaves of your process awareness. All these and more in terms of the nature of activations. That's why these processes are so multifaceted and rich in nature, because we have different activations occur. And the fifth element, therefore, is especially the activation of the gradient of levels. And that's a very important element, because you and I have spoken a little bit about how part of the conundrum and the story of the last 60 years of transformational developmental endeavors that you can trace in part to the hippie movement. They wanted to break away from the past, and they wanted to break away from what they read as oppressive hierarchical structures of the traditional memes, and they wanted to break out of it more than they wanted to break into next new emergent future. Part of what we experienced over the last 60 years was the loss of naturally arising gradients and levels of development and growth. This insight specifically I attribute to Ken Wilber and his work, and the distinction between dominating hierarchies and naturally arising growth ladders. I adapted it to my language and to my framework, but it deserves an attribution in recognizing that distinction. What I observe is that part of what we have seen in my language, Jeff, below the line, pathological expression of that is the drive to plateau everything, to view the world as a one pancake society model, instead of actually recognizing that the gift of coming together with others is that we're surrounded with people that bring talents and developments that we don't have. So therefore, when we walk into the kitchen to cook a special meal, few people will emerge as the natural leaders because they will lead us with their know-how there. And when we then go out of the kitchen into the choir room, we will have different leaders who are not only musically gifted, but would know how to lead a group of people through to find their natural harmonies. And when we then step out to the garden to build a special ecology where a person would be able to find a special spot in the garden to be enhanced by the ecology, we will have new leaders again. And when we then move to work with a group of 9 to 10 to 11-year-olds, we will have new leaders again. And in the same way as I'm pointing at different fields of expression, we could also talk about how there are those that would lead with the grasp, the comprehension, the map of meaning of describing models and their application. There are those that are more advanced on the line of development where it's to do with practices of self-alignment practices, self-printing practices, meditative and devotional practices. And there are those that will lead when we come to other forms of expressions. So the false premise of taking away the naturally arising levels of proficiency and development because of the historic legacy fear and anxiety that so much historically that was associated with hierarchy indeed represented the culprit of injurious social and cultural outcomes. The fear against that created the bounce and the pivot to the extreme other end. And part of what we've struggled with over the last few decades is, can there be a gathering of people where people can recognize that there are others who can coach and mentor and lead? And what do you know, 5 minutes later, the youngest person who just walked in, whether young by age or young by experience, becomes the agency, not just for themselves, but for the collective, because they're able to speak the truth of the moment. So can we be multidexterous enough, trusting enough, open enough, inclusive enough, inclusive in a way that liberates that totalitarian view of postmodernity, where relativism has been taken to the extreme end, such that it doesn't allow for differentiation other than differentiation that is horizontal and is refusing to accept vertical differentiation. That is an important stop situation, an important blockage for developmental communities, for all the right and good reasons, because of struggles of the past. But for as long as we refuse to enter the collective arena, not just with one person who is a luminary and the community, which is still a model of the past, but with many peoples at many different levels along different lines, with that being a moving, shape-shifting diagram, and one that attaches no judgment value of what's better than the other, because sometimes the greatest service for the whole is the person able to configure the next new inquiry. That is the unlock. The unlock is in the person that is able to configure the inquiry. Or the unlock is in the person that brings the cry, and the cry is louder than the petition. And because the cry is louder than the petition, someone else can take the energy of the cry and codify it in the language that will frame the inquiry such that it becomes an unlock for the entire collective. So these were the 5 natures that I observed. We are in a rolling event where we come together with profound shared sentiments to discover that we can become a collective agency where we are being activated at this time, and as part of the activation, we are allowed to recognize and appreciate the sense of different levels and gradients of capacity and capability.